What's up, everyone? How we doing?
Oh my God, thanks for being here, y'all.
I was so psyched when I got this email to be like, we want you to interview Devery, and I was like, you do? So I'm trying to rein it in, but if Reservation Dogs, I think, is one of the best shows of the decade, if not the century. A moment, and this, if you could believe, the only nomination for an Emmy they've gotten is a sound editing creative arts Emmy. And no shade to sound editing, it's great, but the acting, the writing, the filming, where are the awards? So in addition to this amazing award, let's do EGOT A, and the A is ATX TV Festival Award. But this is the beginning of FYC season, so let's go. But Devery, I wanted to ask you, when you first started acting on Reservation Dogs, did you have goals to eventually write and direct as well on the show?
I mean, when I was first cast in Reservation Dogs, we had no idea if it would be picked up for a season 1. So I think no. Yeah. I think in that moment, we were just wanting to be able to tell this story, and we really gave everything we had to this pilot. We had no idea if they'd be picking it up. We're we know we're making it for ourselves and for our communities, and it was really special and emotional. Up until that point, I had felt so isolated on sets, usually being the only Native person, or oftentimes the only queer person, let alone only Native queer person. And so being in that space was unlike any other experience I'd ever had on set. And when I tell you I sobbed when we finished the pilot, I was such an emotional wreck. And we had no idea if we'd be picked up or not. And when we were like, holy shit, I can't believe they're letting us make this show. But then also, I did have dreams to aspire to direct and to write. And I remember at season 1, I had asked Sterling if I would be able to shadow during it. And he was like, yeah, of course. And respectfully, FX was just yeah, but we did bring you on as an actor, so maybe focus on that this season. I'm like, fine, say less, it's okay. But season 2, I asked if I could shadow, and I had gathered all my writing samples, and Sterling had known of my work as a writer-director from short films, even on the festival scene before Res Dogs had even ever happened. So there was definitely a desire to be a part of the process behind the camera, but it just took a little while to get there, but I did.
Yeah, and we're so glad you did. I also think with the character you play of Allura, you got to grow with her for 3 seasons and not only portray her, but then write for her as well. And you wrote one of the most emotional episodes of the season this year, Allura's dad. And so was there a difference when it was you were playing Allura and then you also were writing for her? How did that work as your connection to the character grew?
I mean, it was really wild to be able to be so much entrenched in Allura Dannon's journey. And when in the writer's room, any writer's room in TV, you're all pitching for every episode, you're all collaborating on all of them, and then in order to take the outline to script, then you're assigned different episodes. And so there were definitely elements of Allura's journey that were influenced by my own life. In season 2 with Grandma Mabel was dedicated to my Dada Kenneth, my grandfather when he passed, and being at funerals and showing our way of how to grieve, and showing Allura witnessing death in the right way of how it's supposed to go. And then in season 3, getting to write for Allura and how she's meeting her white dad for the first time. And my mom is Mohawk, she grew up in my community, so is my dad, but my mom is mixed, and she had never met her white dad until she was grown. And so there was definitely elements in there that were infused and steeped in the process, along with it feels like we drew on so many of our own experiences and stories in the writer's room with that. And then to be able to direct episode 6, Wahoo, in the 3rd season, where we send Cookie off on her journey. So it just felt like a full circle for Allura, where it's getting to be with her in every aspect, from grieving Daniel, being in the immediate aftermath of that, to being able to send him off and then heal through, and then to send her mom off, and then to reconnect with her dad, who actually turns out to be like a semi-decent dude, even if he was like a shit-ass young dad. That like it really felt like we got the full spectrum of Allura, and I got to be a part of her in every step of the way. And I had known, even for myself, that if Reservation Dogs were to continue on for were to continue on for a season 4, that I knew Allura's journey was sent off, that she was on her way, and that she would be all right.
Yeah. And I love that. And speaking of, like, this sadly was the final season, but I think that, like, this was one of the best series finales I've ever seen. Like, I think you all in the writer's room, like, and as a performer, like, wrapped it up so beautifully. Was there, like, when was, like, those conversations about, like, how to end it? Like, what were things that you brought to the table as a writer, and what, the wants of the whole community of writers and producers to, like, make sure it ends well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was actually a surprise to a lot of us. When we were in the writer's room portion of season 3, it wasn't supposed to be the end.
Oh, wow.
And it was because usually there's like the writer's room, and then the production writers will take it and do their passes on it. The showrunner will do their pass on it to do any like last minute changes. But it was halfway through season 3, when I was actually directing the Wahoo episode, that I heard, hey, it's sounding like this is actually going to be it. Ooh. It's sounding like this is going to be the end. And there was still, even as we wrapped, there was still a crack in the door left open. Nobody was saying, this is absolutely it, this is finally it. I think Sterling was hoping to do a 4th season that was set in the 1970s, which would be like it would be a different show. It would be a different version of Res Dogs. It would be a glimpse into that space. But yeah, that was kind of the intention. Originally, FX wanted 5 seasons. Like, there was many ideas floating around. There was many different realities and universes of Reservation Dogs. But ultimately, Sterling was saying, he's like, no, in terms of these kids, he's like, it's feeling like it's the end, and he was having to honor that, even if there was that crack left open on our final shooting day. But for myself, I had given myself that closure, knowing that this will be the last time that I'm like connected to Allura in this way, and we're giving her back to Indian country, and we're going to be sending this story off and letting it like live on in its different way. Even if we're not continuing to create it, it'll like live on within our communities.
Yeah. You queued me up really well for my next question. Thank you so much. But I was just wondering, I mean, I know it's impossible when you're so ingrained on every level of the show, but like, to remove yourself a little bit from it, like, how do you think, like, if you were just a viewer, like, this show would affect you, and like how it affects the greater community?
Can you say that one more time?
Oh my God, of course. Just like how, like, if you were just like a person who was like watching this show and you were involved in it, like, what's the sort of like emotional impact on that, and on like the greater, like, the honestly mostly abysmal state of like Indigenous representation on TV right now?
I mean, I have always known how cool Native people are. Like, I've grown up knowing this to be true, and the fact that this is one of like the first opportunities for audiences on a mass scale are able to see that is twofold. On one hand, it's like, fuck yeah. And on the other hand, it's like, well, it's taken you long enough. And so I think I've said from the beginning, whether or not I was a part of Reservation Dogs, it would still continue to be one of my favorite shows. And I think it would have done, even though I knew how cool Native folks were growing up, that like, there's just something that if I had it growing up, what it could have done to see our communities on screen in that way would have just, I think, made a world of difference in what I thought I would be able to do, instead of always having to imagine things and imagine a better future and invent realities. If you can, like people say, if you can see it, you can be it. And so like, I can't even imagine what that would have been like had I had it growing up.
Have you had people come up to you with like their reactions of like what it means to see a show like this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Paulina can't go to a powwow anymore. Like, there's no way that she can walk through and just like watch some dances and buy a taco. Like, no way. But I think for when I'm stopped, a lot of the time it's when people are talking about how they see themselves in Alora's journey, how they have had family members who've died by suicide or were suicidal. I think a lot of the weight that Alora carries in the show and also in like her journey as a character is challenging, and it's not always like the most fun, and she's kind of like a moody person and she's dealing with lots of trauma, but I think at the end of the day people have been really able to connect with her and see what she's experienced and how so many of our communities have experienced that. So a lot of the time it's like very deep conversations that I end up in when people do stop me or when people do reach out and message me, and it really means a lot.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think one of the things that makes Res Dog so special is like, I think it's almost hard to pin down, but like how well it portrays a sense of community across the reservation, but also across time. Like I think what y'all did with the third season of like that episode, like back in the 70s, that episode with the deer lady, like it I think portrays community in a way that like linear TV often doesn't have the skills. And I was just wondering, and I'm like sure the answer is yes, but like how that sense of community like translated to the cast and the crew and like, you know, like what bonds you created with those people. And it's like, you know, that way that a set becomes a family, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I plan on going to Oklahoma this June if I can manage it, because I've been invited out for some dances and like, I don't know, we've formed such a fast family. I've also never met more resilient people than like the Black, Brown, and Native folks in Oklahoma and all that they've had to undergo, but they are still so open and warm and make you feel like family at the same time, which is just something that I'll really miss about shooting over there. I mean, I was here a couple of months ago on a South by panel talking about Res Dogs and was a blubbering mess. I feel like I could like break down at any second talking about this show. But it just like, it really means so much to have shot over there and to have like formed this family and something that we can like hang our hat on forever. But it's, yeah, the way in which community is held, I do take my hat off to Sterling for putting his money where his mouth is, because he could have like gotten more experienced directors and writers in the room who have like done this for decades and know this medium through and through, but he took chances on so many people where it was their first episode of television. As a director, as a writer, it was their first room, and now people are gonna have careers that blossom because he was able to have us in those spaces, whether it's crew members, whether it's cast, and so even like down to the detail of making sure that like it doesn't matter if you're a background performer or a crew member, like elders eat first, and that's who's gonna eat during the buffet line, instead of this like weird Western hierarchical like form that is our industry so oftentimes. And so that's just like one of the small ways that community has been carried through, not only in front of the camera but behind as well.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I think it's also it's so cool to have like, if breaking those sort of like weird Western practices, it's like, you know, creating a new generation of writers and directors who can bring that to their sets as well. So I might come back to it because I want to talk more about Res Dogs always, but moving on to your very successful career elsewhere, I guess. So earlier this year, you were in a Marvel show. You were in 2 Marvel shows actually, but can't get enough of the MCU. But so when you worked on Echo, I noticed that like there's a lot of crossover with talent and with crew on Res Dog. So I know like Sydney Freeland was a director, love her. But so was there, you know, moving into a new world, especially like a very high, big franchise budget world from like a more indie world can be a little challenging, but was having those people there, did that help ease the journey, and was there already some connection there?
Absolutely. I mean, because I had no idea what the character was with Echo. I was not in, like my character wasn't in the comics. They had fabricated her. I got fictitious sides. I didn't get a script. Like I didn't know what the hell I was signing on for, but I did know that Sydney Freeland was at the helm of it. And for those of you who don't know Sydney Freeland, she is an incredible filmmaker. She did Drunktown's Finest back in 2013. She was also a writer and director on season 1 of Reservation Dogs. She's a trans Navajo badass director. And yeah, getting to talk to her about this story and what it was all about. And specifically with this Marvel project, they didn't want Echo, they didn't want Alakwa's character to be like Captain Rogers, who was the one sole chosen person, but instead she was among a community of people. Because as Indigenous peoples, it's like you're not only an individual, but you're like a community member first and foremost. And I think that was the thing that I knew would make it different in this series. And then coming onto set and seeing Sydney at the helm of this huge production, there was like an opening ceremony that they did with the Choctaw Nation, because that's who we were portraying. And we did everything in tandem with them. We set it off in that good way. And then, yeah, seeing these like really wild sets and like intricate things, and then seeing Sydney, who's like my bud from back in the day, at the helm of it, was just one of those pinch me moments, but one that felt like we were doing it right.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, especially in like, within like such a, I don't know, there's a lot of elements going on like a Marvel shoot, you know, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. Was that like, this is such a silly question, but like, how were the fight scenes? Like,
they were so cool. I wish that I could have been a part of more, but like, Alakwa is also a badass, and getting to see them choreograph the fight scenes, most of them were entirely practical. There weren't as much VFX as there are in other Marvel shows, but I think that's what made it feel so gritty and grounded. But yeah, it was really fun and cool. But I think the part that was most special on being on Echo was everybody learning American Sign Language so that they could communicate with Alakwa, so that we could communicate with Katerina Ziervogel, the actress who plays her mom. And yeah, there was a huge sense of responsibility in doing that, but making sure that we were making the space as inclusive as it should be. I think it's not always the case, and it's something that now that I've seen it be done, I want to see it happen more often.
Right. And another element that I really appreciated about Echo is, as opposed to, I feel like oftentimes they're like, this person will maybe have one identity that's outside of the norm. And I think it's so special that's like, she was Native and she was deaf, and that, you know, it's like, those are people that exist in the world, and those are also people that can like beat up people and fight. But like, do you, again, it's kind of a similar like question I asked about Res Dogs, like, what do you think like sort of the impact is of seeing this story in like a very mainstream space of Marvel, of like, you know, comic bros are going to be watching and have watched that show? It's like, what is the impact of that you've seen or you hope to see?
I mean, the impact has been huge. It's like the #2 watched series on Disney Plus or something like that, which is wild. And also, I might be a little salty about it, but like if you look at the budget on what we made Echo for, it is a fraction of what it's usually made in Marvel series. And I think we just proved everybody wrong, that people want to see Native stories and want to see deaf stories.
And they should pay y'all more, probably.
You said it.
Yeah, and I think that's incredible. And I think sometimes, like, sadly, it takes a show and a big franchise to do that as well. But are there, like, do you have any, like, you know, obviously there are, like, artistic aspirations, but do you also have any more aspirations to be in more, like, big budget franchisey things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. For me, I want to be in a series of different things. I want to do things I haven't done before, ones that I'm really excited about. So I never say never.
I love that. You and Justin Bieber both.
Please let that be the only commonality between us.
Only pull quote from this whole conversation. Speaking of very different things, so you have a movie opening in theaters that has opened in theaters this weekend, Back Spot. It is, yeah, cheer for it. It is currently playing at the Alamo Draft House. Go see it. Be like, wow, what a great weekend of TV. Now time to see a movie on the big screen. And it's like a very queer cheerleading film. So already a pitch. Already I'm in. But besides the obvious of it being a queer cheerleading film, like what initially drew you to Backspot?
Yeah, I have been working on Backspot for almost 7 years.
Oh my gosh.
I am a producer on it. I produced it with the director, D.W. Watterson, who also created the story by. I also have a history as a competitive gymnast and provincial champion, which a lot of people didn't realize that I had in my back pocket from a former life. But we wanted to explore the conversation of what it means for a young queer person, a young queer athlete, to idolize a coach who also happens to be queer. And a lot of the times in queer community, elder queers have done so much and we idolize them so much and are so full of gratitude for the plights and fights that they've had to go for us to have the rights that we do now. And sometimes we take it for granted, and sometimes elder queer folks harbor a bitterness or resentment towards these younger queer folks. So there's just like, when people talk about queer cinema, they usually think of romantic relationships, but we are in community with each other in so many different ways. And so that was really the initial spark of the conversation in diving into Backspot. It was executive produced by Elliot Page. We have Evan Rachel Wood playing the coach. And it was definitely a very long labor of love. But we were finally able to bring it to theaters, and it's the first time I've ever had a movie in cinema before.
So you all have to see it now. But yeah, I wanted to touch on just how queer this film is, and like trying not to spoil it, but like there's maybe one character who's straight, and she never really talks about boys, so it's like you never know. But like I think what's so important that you touched on is that like queer people do not exist in isolation. And I think it's like there is, your character Riley, she has a girlfriend, there's Evan Rachel Wood's character, and then there's also one of my favorite characters in the film was Devin, who's like the assistant coach, and there's a very beautiful scene between your character and his character later in the film. And what was the process of like working on this for so many years? Like what were the conversations y'all had about making sure this story is authentic and like representative of the queer experience?
I mean, by filling as many roles with queer folks and queer artists was a way that I don't think we were intentionally trying to make it more queer. I think it was just more reflecting what our experiences look like. For me, as a creator behind the camera, because a lot of people have noticed that when I use my name Devery Jacobs, it's for acting work, and when I use my full name, Gawanahere Devery Jacobs, that is something that I use when I've been a creator on a project, as a writer, a director, or as a producer. And in the case for Backspot, like I am not only an Indigenous person, I have multifaceted sides to who I am as a person, and being queer is very much a part of that, of who I am. And so getting to tell this queer story was also really important to me. And much like Reservation Dogs, much like Echo, and now with Backspot, I think it's showing what that sense of community looks like. And when you think of minorities that are checking diversity boxes, you think of like one Native person, one queer person in a sea of like cis, het, white people, but that's not my experience at all. It's being in community with these people. And so that's what we wanted to reflect in Backspot, is that like, we're just reflecting the world that myself and DW live in. And being on that, there were a few things we did want to set out to do though. One, we didn't want to make the conflict be in the queerness. We wanted it to be within the sport, because cheerleading is so badass, so brutal, so athletic. Like, people underestimate cheerleading so much, and it's really unfortunate because they are some of the most kick-ass athletes out there. And then we also wanted to have spoiler alert, but we wanted to have the love interests end up together, because so often we don't get to see those happy endings the way that hetero couples might in film and TV. Instead, you have the bury your gays trope. You have the trope of them being ripped apart and tragic endings. So for us, those were the two things that we set as guidelines, because when I talked about Res Dogs being something that I needed to see growing up, I feel like Backspot, I created something that I personally needed to see. I didn't know of any queer folks, let alone Native queer folks growing up. And also it's even though it's a kick-ass cheerleading movie, there's a lot of like tender healing parts in there that I feel were just so important to me that I'm able to see and put out into the world for our youth. And yeah.
Yeah, and give it a round of applause. I also think what was so special, and I think you can tell when projects are made from queer people, like in both these overarching things, like you were saying, like making sure people are queer and they get a happy ending, but also in the details. And there's a scene like pretty early on in Backspot that's your character and her girlfriend are like in the car singing a song from Legally Blonde the musical, and I was like, this is my experience. This is representation. So I just think it is. But like, it's oftentimes we think of these big things, but I think in the details is also where you can tell that there are queer people behind the camera. And also like, it's a little tongue in cheek. Like I think straight people be like, they are singing a song in the car. And then me watching, I'm like, that's just like me. But so great work. Was there anything like when you're working with people like DW and Evan and Elliot, it's like, are there, I guess, are you using this sort of as like an opportunity to be like a sponge from people who've like been around and like in a time where it was like much harder to get like queer things made?
I think so. I think working with these people, they have uplifted us in many ways. I don't think we would have been able to make this film had it not been for Elliot Page. At the time when we were gathering funding, the funding body we had gone out to said like, we love the film, we love the script, but we're not going to be supporting it at this time. And we asked for feedback why, and they said, well, we just didn't understand why the protagonist was Indigenous. And yeah, thank you for that reaction, because for me, it just really specified how people still view Indigenous artists, and that we have to somehow be in a specific lane on a res talking about colonial trauma, and like we can't just be gay ass cheerleaders. And but when I had talked to Elliot over like a general meeting where I was geeking out at meeting him, right, he was just like, this script sounds amazing, I would love to read it. We sent it to him and we told him what the feedback was, and he was like, oh hell no. And when he came on board, then a lot of the funding opportunities open for us, and he's been championing us from day one. So it's been because of people like him, because of people like Evan, like lending her voice and coming on to this small ass indie film that we've managed to do a lot with, which is so meaningful. And then also getting to, in terms of like being a sponge and learning, I think I've had, and this is no diss to like the incredible scene partners I've ever had, like Ethan Hawke, Evan Rachel Wood, like it goes on. But I think Shannon Sossaman, who played my mom in Backspot, is honestly like the most inspiring actor I think I've ever worked with. And there were moments where DW would direct us to have silent takes, where we would say nothing at all to each other in the scene, except we would run the scene, but it would all be through emoting. And so much of that ended up in the scenes. So it was wild. Like, people have been sleeping on Shannon Sossaman for way too long, and getting to work with her was probably like the most inspiring from an artistic perspective.
I love that. And speaking of, in the film, like Riley's relationship with her mom, the film dealt with a lot of like anxiety and mental health, and I think it's, again, sort of that thing of like, you don't have to just talk about like one thing, but like, how do you feel in sort of like striking that balance of being like, there's some serious stuff going on in this girl's life, but also like, we are having fun, like with, it's like, how do you sort of like strike that balance, both like as a performer and as like a producer on a project?
I mean, I think really relying on DW for their sense of tone was helpful, because they are somebody who has a really specific sense of style, and they were inspired by like Bend It Like Beckham and Bring It On and like all of these really commercial movies, because like their voice specifically catering to young people and not underestimating young people. I think a lot of YA content people don't take seriously. They like to say that it's not highbrow enough or that things are immature, but like young people are going through things for the first time ever, and it's in such an overwhelming time, but also are silly and also should be taken seriously. And so there are so many multifaceted aspects to these characters, and truly I feel like playing Riley was the most three-dimensional character that I've ever played, and like as an actor is one of the roles that I'm most proud of. I think that it was almost invisible, where if you look at one scene, you wouldn't be able to tell that I was like playing a character per se. But if you look at the entire project, that it was like all of the her joy, her anguish, her competitiveness, her obsessiveness, her like, and everything in between is on there. And yeah, I know for a fact that I would have never been cast in a role like Riley had I not created her for myself with DW.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the last question on Backspot is a silly one. So because you said you were a gymnast, did you do all your own stunts in that movie?
I did all of my own stunts except for one.
Okay. For people who haven't seen this movie, it's the fact that you did all your stunts is unreal. Like because so much of the movie is about the physical strain on this girl's body. Like, were you okay? Like,
I had to make sure I was okay. I play a lot of teenagers, and I am not a teenager. I mean, I'm totally a teenager. What are you talking about? No, I used to be a gymnast. That was over 10 years ago. I hadn't been keeping it up. So leading up to it, I knew I needed to take care of myself because since we didn't have a stunt double for me for 98% of the time, if I went down, I knew the whole production would go down. Wow. And so I went to physiotherapy, I went to personal training, I went to open gymnastics, I went to open cheer, where I had to learn how to do the pyramids and how to back spot. And I also was getting my splits back, stretching every day, doing yoga. Like it was a lot, but it was also balancing at the same time that I wasn't overexerting myself so I wouldn't get injured leading up to the production. And I was like pretty clear with DW. I'm like, okay, you got 2 more tumbling passes and that's it. And so then they'd like rally the crew and be like, okay, we got to get it in these 2. But there was a lot of like making sure I was checking in with myself and not doing too much while also trying to keep up with like actual 18-year-old cheerleaders.
Yeah, I was like, wow, you've been 16 for 10 years now. I don't know how long. But in that, in working, on a film and like in television, is there like another like medium or like sort of like a dream like role or a dream like kind of film or TV you want to take part of?
There are so many things that I want to do that I'm like, I don't even have time for anything. I want to be able to act opposite Lily Gladstone one day.
It's like the misconnection on the Res Dog set.
I know, we were 2 ships in the night. And yeah, I mean, I'm working on a bunch of stuff right now. I'm working on another film with DW. We're writing a graphic novel together. I went to the Sundance Lab for the script that I'm writing and want to direct called High Steel. There are many projects that we have that like we're juggling and carrying on through our production company, Night is Why. But also as an actor, like, yeah, there's just so much that I want to do. We'd be here all day if I'm listing them off.
We could do that. Are there any of the active projects in development, like, are you allowed to speak about what they are?
Maybe not the ones that I'm developing per se, but I was just cast in a Christmas movie, which is like, honestly, I will always take on the sense of responsibility comes with representing Indigenous people and queer people because that's who I am, and I will do that any day of the week. And it's also nice to just be in a motherfucking Christmas movie and not have to carry the weight of that for a hot second. But it's with Amazon, it's with Michelle Pfeiffer, Chloe Grace Moretz, Felicity Jones. Like the cast
some jaws
is
dropping in the
stacked.
audience.
And I actually head out right after this so I could go back to Atlanta so I can film it.
The grind never stopped. What was this is just my curiosity, like 2023, like what was your shooting? Like it's like Res Dogs, Backspot, Echo, like do you have time to just chill?
I will after this movie is done, question mark. I'm actively trying to make sure to do that. I think for a long time, I felt like I had missed my window. I was in a film called Rhymes for Young Ghouls by the late and great Jeff Barnaby. Back in 2012, I had moved to New York after that. I almost booked so many huge roles and was in consideration, and I lost all of them like clockwork. I was broke. All of the roles out there for Native folks were like Pocahontas, stereotypical shit. And I was just like, I've missed my window. I got dropped by my managers. And so I started writing out of necessity, and I made peace with the fact that I would have to create stuff for myself, and that was just gonna be it. And I would be fighting to get stuff out there, and then everything really changed with Reservation Dogs, and I knew an opportunity like this didn't come around every once in a while, one that I just like loved so much, and so I poured everything into it and everything into these projects to hopefully stir momentum. But yeah, I think I've kind of kept my head down and have been grinding for the past 3 years, and I'm closing the chapter of Res Dogs and Backspot coming out, but I'm looking up and looking around and feeling like, whoa, I'm in a very different place than I was 3 years ago.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I feel like, you know, us as sort of like audiences or fans, like we're not aware of the pre-momentum, like, you know, so it's like, wow, look at this. I think the phrase like, this person is like an overnight success is like the worst phrase ever, because I'm like, you have been putting in the work. But yeah, we have some time to take some audience questions if anyone, I know we have a mic around here. Oh, yes. All right. How about you up here? Wait for the mic, I believe, for filming purposes.
Thank you. All right. First of all, thank you for being here. Big fan. This is a question about Reservation Dogs in one of the episodes, the Offerings episode with Willie Jack and the ancestors was incredibly overwhelming as somebody that prays to their ancestors. What was that like, whether you were on set or watching it later?
I was not on set for that, but that episode was many different things, and at one point it was like a yard sale, and they just, like, in the writer's room, we couldn't break the episode, and Migazy Pensino had written that episode, and he wrote it, I think, like 3 days before they shot it, and it had all just kind of flooded and came to him, and is one that I think is so resonant for so many of us, whether we have incarcerated family members or community members, or whether it is those conversations about our ancestors. But there was just something that was so beautiful and meaningful in that. I know so many people, that's their favorite episode. I don't know if I could choose a favorite in general. It's like choosing a favorite child. But that one was definitely so special, and the performances in that were haunting.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
Do you want to just pass the mic right behind you?
Thank you. The episode with Laura Dana meeting her dad is a great. I screamed at the TV for you to go get pizza with them. But my question is, how much pressure do you put on yourself, or imposter syndrome, or do you deal with having to write or be so much for so many people?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think it's not something that's unknown for Native women. And in our communities, we're like the center of our communities and our cultures for so often of the time. And there are so many incredible, talented men on Reservation Dogs, and the women of Res Dogs are also the ones who are up there holding things up with them. And it can get heavy. It can get really heavy. And I think taking those breaks and taking that time, like doing a Christmas movie, is really helpful to be able to just like be and replenish, because the weight can get heavy if you don't take care of yourself in the process. So I'm trying to do that. Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question.
Anyone else? Oh, all the way over there. Yes. Oh, 2 mics. Amazing.
Hello. Okay. Thank you for being here. Also, big fan of you in the show. I was really fascinated when you said that you use your sort of stage name, Devery, and then for things that you create, you used your fuller name. I'm also a person who has a full name that is Spanish and people can't always pronounce, and so it's Candelaria, in case you're wondering. And I also do a similar thing of I'm a writer, and when I'm putting my name on a byline, I say Candelaria, because to me that's also honoring my grandmother and her grandmother and all the places that name came from. But then when I'm here at this festival, I'm it's Conde. So I was just wondering of your relationship to your name, especially your full name, and sort of how you kind of came to that decision of just where you would use each one.
Yeah, I mean, I've always used both Galbanahide and Devery. Devery was something that I used when I was in gymnastics or off my res. Also, traditionally in my community, we believe that if you shorten somebody's name, if you give them a nickname, you're shortening their life. Or or in Ganyak Gaha specifically, if you shorten somebody's name, it doesn't mean anything because it's a whole phrase. And so my first name, Gawanahire, was given to me by my duda, by my grandmother, and it's named after her favorite aunt. But directly, it translates to her word is above, or like loosely translates to like what I have to say is important. And so like I hope to live up to that name, and that's something that I'm like personally trying to do in my life. It's more of a personal name for sure. Everybody in my family, everybody in my community calls me Gawanahirde. And also, yeah, Devery like also works, like Devery doesn't feel bad for me. So I have also always used both, but when it comes of me, it feels fitting to like honor my full Ganyak Geha name. It's not like Devery's a fake name.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, no, you. Whoever you call.
I pointed.
No, that's closer to the mic. You can go next.
Hi. I was wondering which one of your hyphenates is your favorite? Not like your favorites out of like, you don't have to choose, but like which one do you just feel like you're in your bag and you're like, I got this every time? But also, how do you see your hyphenates like helping, even when you do have a singular role, like if you're just acting or just writing, do you feel like you're kind of pulling from your experience as a producer, as an actor, as you're doing all those things?
It's exactly what you said. I feel like all of them intrinsically help with the other. I started out as an actor, so I feel like that's the one that immediately called to me and the one that I'll always be doing. If there's any other hyphenate, it's definitely writing that I feel is the one that's closest to me. And then when it comes to producing and when it comes to directing, those I definitely need to feel called to depending on the story. Those are something that like there needs to be an especially personal element that's calling me to do those things, but I'm not gonna like, I don't know, go and direct episode 24 of some cable TV show. That's for me personally is not my journey as a storyteller, but that's what I think that I am, whether on, and it really is project dependent, but I do feel like I'm a storyteller regardless of the medium.
What about gymnast?
We're gonna leave those moves on camera. They're more memorialized forever and they never have to come back out.
And if you go to the Alamo Draft House, you can see it. I think you had a question in the back?
It's also available on demand too, if you can't make it out, but in theaters, always the best.
Your breakthrough comes at a time when Res Dogs, Rutherford Falls, Dark Winds came in a moment where there was more representation, there were more projects being greenlit. From the outside, it feels like that momentum is slowed or stopped, and maybe that window is kind of shut. From inside the industry, do you still see those opportunities? Is there still the chance that that momentum's continuing?
I mean, I don't know that your read is inaccurate. I feel like with Reservation Dogs ending, there's a void being left in the industry right now that I don't necessarily see as being filled, and it's always been the hope with Res Dogs that we could launch other artists out of it and that it could be the first of many. I think it's up to these execs and these networks and studios to, I don't even know if it's taking a chance at this point because we've shown that these projects can be successful and are successful. I do know of many people developing and working on different things right now. It's my hope that they get made. They're coming for you.
Oh, yeah. So this might be more of a curiosity of mine, but when you're directing, what are the directing or writer inspirations that you take when you go in, when you're thinking about a project, when you're already on set? And are there any directors that you would love to work side by side or would love to work in front of a camera?
There are so many. I am like an A-type person in very specific ways, and one of them is making lists. So I have a very long list of directors I want to work with, of actors, of writers. But yeah, there are definitely people who I pull inspiration from, like D.W. Watterson from Backspot, like Sydney Freeland, like Danis Goulet, who directed the Mabel episode in season 2. That was her first episode of television ever. She had only directed a feature film before that point, a low-budget indie feature film at that. But I don't think I would be pursuing storytelling whatsoever if it wasn't for Danis. She used to be a programmer at the Toronto International Film Festival, where I had submitted my very first short to. I had been discouraged from other people in the industry who were supposed to be mentors saying, like watching the film saying like, yeah, I would focus on acting, was the feedback that I got, which was devastating. But at that same time, Danis said, your short didn't get into the festival, but listen, I don't want you to be discouraged. Like, please continue doing this. You have a voice in there. Like, keep at it. And here is an industry pass. So you get to watch all of the films at the festival for free. And that was the year that Moonlight was playing. And I was so inspired. And it was like such a beautiful full circle to be able to come back and work with her as a writer on an episode that she was directing, and one that we did hand in hand and was able to bring to life in something that was as special as sending off Grandma Mabel.
Love that. Oh, right, pass the mic behind you. I love when y'all coordinate this.
I planned it that way. This is kind of a big question, but since we are talking so much about the queer identity and it being Pride Month, and your film is out right now and deals with some YA themes, basically all I saw yesterday when I went on social media of any company posting anything about Pride was hate and vitriol and the resurgence of groomer narratives. Now, as we are fans of you and want to support this film and defend it, what's your advice, either of you, when we're faced with those kinds of conversations? When we're trying to tell somebody you should watch this movie about a teenage girl who's on this cheerleading team who falls in love and has this mentor.
So you're asking what should we do in the wake of that?
Like, what's the response like that we should have? Like when someone like me, I have anxiety and I tend to just seize up and like go in a shell and walk away from it. So like, what do you want people to say to push back against those narratives?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's a small, loud, like narrative that is like, the internet is bad, short version. But no, like, I think a lot of times if you see that like social media response, it's like a lot of vitriol, a lot of hate, like that is a very, very loud group of people, which is small, but it's also oftentimes those people are in powerful positions. I'm like looking at the Capitol up the street. But I think first of all, there's like no shame in if you can't fight back. If like walking away and ignoring it and like prioritizing yourself and your own mental health is sometimes the best thing we can do as queer people. And I also think it's finding like, knowing that this like, there is a response, like there may be hateful responses, but what they are responding to often are like amazing works from queer creative people like Backspot. And like, I think no matter like how much it seems online and like in the news and whatever, like the queer community is immensely strong and like immensely powerful. And I think it's like, if that is, oftentimes you see the hate and it's very isolating. I think community is like the best thing we have. And like, it's also something I was like shouting out in all of Devery's projects, but like I think there's always like, I don't know, this sounds so cheesy of like, you're never alone, but like, I think as queer people, we are never alone because our movement was founded on community and solidarity. And all of these, like, I'm also here for like an LGBTQ organization. So like, maybe I'm biased. Like, I'm like, everyone I've met, so many people I've met at this festival are like wonderful queer people and want to support queer art and want to do what we can and like also hang out and have fun. So it's like, and there's so many great people to help you with. I think I lost the plot a little. I'm gonna hand it back to Devery.
No. No, I think everything Raina said was exactly right. And one of the things I noticed, because I am from a res in Canada, that's where I'm based, and when I first went to Oklahoma to film Res Dogs, I was wondering what it would be like, especially being a queer person. And Tulsa, Oklahoma has some interesting politics, and there are also so many queer people there, and it just was a reminder. I'm like, queer people are everywhere. Like, we can't be stopped. That's who we are, and we've always existed, and in a lot of our Indigenous communities have actually been celebrated and considered sacred back in the day. So it's like reminding ourselves of that, of having that community to lean on. I think something that's so beautiful that when I came out, I felt a lot of like inferiority complex because I had come out as an adult and had blinders on for so long in my life. But I had been born into the Indigenous community, so felt like I didn't get to step into or claim my queerness because it was something that had felt very new and unfamiliar to me. But at that point, I realized that it's only the queer community and the disabled community are the only communities in the world that touch on every single community and culture, that span across every region of the world, that span across, like it doesn't matter regardless of race or religion or anywhere you are. And that was just something that felt so unifying and welcoming, and that I was able to step into and find my voice within all of that. But it really does come down to community. I would love to be as eloquent as like Alok in their responses to hate and vitriol. I am more likely the person who shuts up and says nothing until after I'm like, damn, I should have said that thing. But being able to lean on people who I love, who see me for who I am, and I get to see them for who they are, and we get to rejoice in that as we do this month during Pride. Happy Pride, y'all.
Happy Pride. Ooh. I think we have time for one more. Ooh, or not. Oh, there we go. White jacket.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Devery. Just a question on the responsibility you feel to represent the different communities you belong to. And I'm asking as a writer and comedian and a Palestinian one, so I talk a lot about my Palestinian identity and experience. And I was wondering, how do you balance your creative process and wanting to explore your experience and your identity with that responsibility and maybe perhaps some scrutiny that you receive from your community, because the spaces for our representation are so few that there is that pressure whether we like it or not. And I was wondering, like, because I'm a up and coming writer, were you deliberate in surrounding yourself with sounding boards that you trusted? Were they professional mentors or personal contacts from your life, family, etc., that you could be like, hey, am I pandering to a broader Canadian American audience, or is this right? Does this sound good to you? Just curious about that.
Yeah, I think also thank you for being here, and I can definitely appreciate what you're experiencing with your community. I know like we're standing in solidarity with all oppressed people, and in terms of pandering to white audiences, I think that's something that like I learned from Jeff Barnaby not to do, because his work, which was the film the first leading role I had done, he kind of like smashed whatever spoon feeding would happen. And so I think the way in which we can do that is just to make sure that we're telling stories for ourselves and our loved ones. And anybody who I've had around me has been queer folks, has been Native folks, whether they're like established in the industry or not. I think I've come up among like a group of peers, and now we're starting to break through and we're trying to like get each other through the door as quickly as we can, so that we can be in this community at this level that has a semblance of power. And yeah, so I think it's just a matter of like, for me, how I navigate it is making sure that like I'm telling the stories that I creatively need to see and need to hear, and everybody else can just catch up.
All right, we're gonna bring Emily back up because I hear there's an award.
Raina, thank you. That was amazing.
Of course, thank you.
Devery, we are so honored to have you here.
You can stand up.
You can stand up. We are so honored to have you here. I mean, as I said at the beginning, we have been such a fan of yours since you first came on screen. You've been doing such incredible work, both, I mean, for all of your identities, but just for storytelling in general. So no, I know you feel a lot of pressure to represent everything and everything you are, but the stories you're telling are phenomenal. And we here at ATX TV celebrate incredible stories, and we are so honored to celebrate you. So thank you so much for being here and having this incredible conversation with all of us. I do want to present you with our official Breakthrough Award.
My goodness.
My only apologies is I wish it had your full name on it. So, but know that we are so we love having you here, and thank you for coming. And we can't wait to see your Christmas movie.
Yeah,
Do you like movies here too? So thank you.